This is a grant that I led on with, as you can see, my whole project team is on the right-hand side here. And we looked at reducing barriers to cervical screening for autistic people and people with learning disabilities or learning difficulties, whichever term you tend to use. Um, this came about as a result of reading around background. We know cervical cancer is the 14th most common cancer in women and people with a cervix. Um, Approximately 30% of people with learning difficulties and autistic people attend cervical screening, compared to sort of 70% of women who don't have learning difficulties, and who aren't autistic. So there's quite a big gap there. And that's not only Greater Manchester, it's nationally. So if you have a deep dive into the stats on the databases, you can actually break it down into areas, and they're all pretty much the same, in terms of who attends and who doesn't. Um, Reasons why people don't attend: embarrassment, obviously, fear, no support. And sometimes there's just a lack of awareness of what extra support people with learning difficulties and autistic people might need. So what we did was, before we even went and got any funding, we went to the different learning disability voluntary organisations. This one was Pathways, which runs throughout the whole of Greater Manchester. And we said, what do you think we need to do? Can you help us? And so they decided that they would help us. And we actually had somebody with learning disabilities and autism come with us to bid with us when we did the Dragon's Den to bid for money. And that was useful. They brought together this slide, which is the difference between co-produced work and consultative work. And I think for me, a lot of work that we do is really consultation, because we decide what we're going to do. We go off and we get the funding, then we involve people. And we don't really do it on a co-produced basis, and that's because of the way funding's organised. It's not a criticism of people doing research; it's just the way funding is organised. And if it was organised differently, then we'd probably have more people doing research in this way. Um, they co-production. They came up with the image of the pizza, which I thought was highly inventive. And this is how they did it. They, as I say, they did. We had somebody with learning disabilities and autism present with us, and we overran by a huge amount. And people were saying at the end, "Oh God, we've made a mistake doing this, and I think we've fluffed it." And I said, "No," I said, "We've just made it perfectly obvious why we need that extra time, why we're costing for extra time." It became obvious throughout the presentation that things weren't as straightforward. So that really was in our benefit, I think. Right. When we started off, we discussed the ideas for the study with people with learning disabilities and autistic people. And we also went to parents of children with learning disabilities and autism, because there was a low take-up rate for the HPV, human papillomavirus, HPV inoculation. Um, and we said, "Do you want, what do you want? Do you want booklets? What would you want?" And they said, "We actually think a video would be better, and it would actually be more applicable for us." So that's what we did. And the actual educational literature says that videos actually present something in smaller bite-sized pieces, and visual representation is sometimes very useful. So we then advertised and designed, alongside people with learning difficulties, an advert asking for working group participants for one part of the study. And we formed, obviously, a working group for part of the study for the cervical screening, with 3 adults with learning disabilities, 1 autistic adult. And then there was another working group, which was 7 parents, who were all Urdu speaking, of children with learning disabilities and autistic children as well. So they were parents of. Um, our initial working group sessions were we co-designed rules of the meeting. So how people should interact, what sort of things we would find acceptable and not acceptable, rules about confidentiality, like not talking to people about what other people have said during the meetings, things like that. And we also discussed the how often we needed to meet, whether we'd meet online, whether we wanted to meet face to face. Some people wanted to meet face to face. Some people said, let's mix it up. Let's do some face to face and some online. Or those of you that want to meet, can I dial in and sort of meet you via video link? So there was a variety of ways that people decided that they wanted to interact. First, we looked at existing resources for people with learning difficulties and autism, and we broke down all the different information that there was, what the resources were, and they said it's lengthy and it's confusing, there's too much. And really what we want to know is what happens in cervical screening. It doesn't tell us that. Um, they also said there was a lot of things that could be improved and implemented. There was a video at the time, it was 17 and a half minutes long, and they said it's just too long for us, there's just too much information. It's information overload. We want something short. So that's what we did. That video has since gone because the company that produced that and the resources has vanished. The funding was stopped, and therefore everything was withdrawn. So accessibility was reduced yet again. Um, and they also said there was a need for additional resources to support the varied forms of communication that people had, and information about consent for cervical screening as well. Okay, parents. They agreed to meet regularly. And they didn't want to talk about HPV, which is interesting. They wanted to know why their children needed the vaccine. And they said these resources, we did show them 3 existing videos. One was an NHS video about HPV and the need for the vaccine. And they said it just wasn't culturally appropriate, even though it was done in Urdu. And there was too much information on it for them to make a decision. And it was unnecessary, a lot of the information. They also said sex is a no-no. We don't want to discuss that. Thank you very much. We just want to know, like, if we'd have known there was a link with HPV and cancer, we really wanted to know that. That's important. That needs highlighting. So for the meetings, obviously, we needed a translator. So that translator was very, very important for the progress of the meetings, because even though the women spoke English, they felt more comfortable communicating in Urdu. So they also pointed out that the one video that we had in Urdu, it was academic Urdu, they called it, and that's not appreciated or understood by a lot of the community. So they asked, could they make it more colloquial Urdu, Urdu that's used by a community rather than by academics or clinicians. We've now translated the HPV video into 10 languages, so that's being used by cervical screening. The people with learning difficulties came up with reasons why they didn't have the screening test. They also wanted the video breaking down into 4 separate videos. So we did that for them as well. So as you can see, the length of timings for each of the videos were, there we go, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, and 2 minutes. The one that's been accessed the most is what happens when you go for cervical screening. Okay, and obviously they enjoyed it. They wanted to break down the barriers. This was their way of showing that they were breaking down barriers. Findings for the staff evaluations. We evaluated the staff video and they thought it was short and informative. 5 minutes was a long time for some staff because they thought There's been reductions available for staff development, barriers, lack of mandatory training on disability for staff, lack of policy guidance for cervical screeners and people with learning disabilities and autistic people. There was no specific site, which boggles my mind, with updated materials so staff could just go to the site and go, that's what I need, I could take that. Lack of support for screening staff about reasonable adjustments and discussing about, and that's not poking fingers at staff. This is sometimes because of the randomness of areas, the way they are, and who is in different areas. So it could be that they just don't see anybody with learning disabilities or any autistic people within their practice. And there was a poor and variable IT infrastructure, which creates inequity for the staff as well as for people with learning difficulties and autistic people. So things like there was no recognizable way of marking some areas, and not everybody got marked as having a learning disability or autistic. So you could get somebody coming in with autism or somebody coming in with a learning disability, and the cervical screener or the member of staff that's doing the screening just wasn't aware. So, and that's not their fault if it's not flagged up beforehand. So it's difficult. Everywhere was different. Right. We filmed this. We showed the films at a filming event in Manchester, and as you can see, we asked people to tell us in three short words what they thought the films were like, what it did for them. A lot of them, as you can see, it was informative and easy to understand. They were powerful, empowering, friendly. So people found the films useful. And I'm going to stop there. And thank you very much to the community partners who helped us. They're all here. And to you for listening.